that you love.
That was his area of work back when he was in Baltimore.
Okay.
And he came out
At
there
Hopkins?
Pardon?
At Hopkins?
He was with the University of Maryland. Yeah. And
Yeah, we got it all on our table.
All right. Good morning, or good afternoon, everybody. It's been one of those mornings already. Let me welcome to our mental health community for this month. And I'm Todd Olthoff. I'm pastor of Pastoral Care at Saddleback. And what I'd like to do is let me just open us in a word of prayer, and then we can get started from there. Father in heaven, I thank you so much for this day. I thank you so much for the fact that we get to gather today to talk about just a very important topic of our mental health and mental health for our kids, Lord. You have created us. You've made us just so detailed and intricate and all the different pieces, Lord Jesus. And I just thank you that we get to gather together to talk about some of the things that we wrestle with and some of the ways that we can move through some of these things. And we're just blessed to have you with us. So I just pray that you would guide and direct our time. I pray, too, that you'd bless the food to our bodies that we have, and just bless this day. In your name, amen. All right, so a couple of things as we get started. We do have food in the back. For those of you that don't know that we had food, now you know we do have food in the back. So if you'd like to get some lunch, go ahead and pick some lunch up, and that would be awesome. We also have some, I know some drinks on the side over here. One of the things that I just wanted to kind of walk you through, on your table you have notes and some things, name tags. And so if you didn't put a name tag on yet, go ahead and put your name on there. Unless you want everybody to say, hey, you, and maybe that's fine with you too, who knows. But otherwise, just write your name on there. We also have, I want to point out, we have these cards on the table. These are really important because as you're listening to the presentation today, if you have any questions that you want to ask, we don't just do random questions. You write them on these cards, and we have a question and answer time at the end. So have this handy so that as you're listening, you can think of something, you can write your question down on the card, and we'll be able to get to those, and we'll collect those during a discussion time later. A few other things that I wanted to point out is we do have different resources around the room. So we've got some books over there that you might want to check out with QR code links to Amazon to be able to get those books. We've got some other resources on the table next to the waters over there. We have Celebrate Recovery in the back, our Celebrate Recovery table, woohoo, over there in the back. And so, awesome. We're half alive. I know the food's almost in. So it's funny because I feel like the whole room is skewed this way. I want to go like this. Because everybody seems like they're on this side. So, also in the back in the corner, we have a prayer table over there. And so, if you need prayer, we got a prayer team over there that would love to pray with you during or after the time that we have together. And so we also have a newcomers table. If you're brand new, there's a newcomers table right over here. And so if you'd like to sit there and meet some new people, we'd love to just introduce you to what we have going on and everything that we do here at the church. So we have a newcomers table there as well. One more thing, I know because it's going to be asked, the bathrooms, because you're eating and drinking stuff. So in the very corner, if you go all the way down to the first floor on the bottom, that's where we have the bathrooms. And so you can take the stairs out there and they wind down to where the bathrooms are. So you eat your food, you work off the calories, and then you come back up and you can have some more. You can have seconds. So we got you covered all the way around. So what we'd like to do is have you go ahead and eat your food, but turn into your table together and just discuss what do you hope to get out of mental health community today. So introduce yourself, talk about that a little bit, and then we'll bring you back in a few. All right, go for it. All right, let me pull you back in here. I hear great conversation and some of you chew loud. No, I'm teasing. So anyways, so I want to introduce Megan Greider to you. Come on up, Megan. She's going to give a devotional and her testimony. All right, so welcome, Megan. And
all right. So I didn't think that my heart could break anymore than on the day a doctor cautioned my husband and me to keep our oldest away from belts and knives and make sure that we didn't leave him alone with any of our other children as we took him off his medication for anxiety and depression. He was 10 years old. But I was wrong, because my heart broke over and over and over again. That same son had his first psychotic break when he was 22 years old and another major health crisis when he was 24. And that last crisis came just months after I found our youngest trying to throw a mirror out the window and disclosing that he planned on following it. He was overwhelmed with anxiety, social isolation, and wondering in this post-COVID world, would anything ever make sense again? In my 27 years of motherhood, I've walked through a lot with our kids. Social anxiety, depression, somatization disorder, social media addiction, physically and emotionally traumatic events, COVID, and the daily hardships of just being a human being. And everything that I share today, I do so with their permission. I love my sons and daughter with a fierce and protective heart, and I have struggled with deep feelings of powerlessness, inadequacy, and hopelessness. So I thought we could start our time together looking at the book of Lamentations. Doesn't that sound so fun, right? Lamentations. Yet right in the middle of this book, just like right in the middle of some seasons in my life, there are some surprising truths. Lamentations 3:20 through 24 reads, "My soul is downcast within me. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. His compassions are new every morning. They never fail. Great is your faithfulness. And I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, and I will wait on the Lord." And this passage has meant so much to me as a mom, as I've journeyed through and struggled with kids who have mental health challenges and mental illness. And I've also loved this passage as a woman who tries to reconcile the painful reality that life is hard and doesn't make sense with the truth that God can still be good. I love that our God allows lament to exist side by side with hope. Because lament names what is broken, truth names what is still good, and faith says both can be true at the same time. I can lament what is broken, the broken dreams that my sons have, the broken hopes that I had for my family, and I can still hope in what is true, or more specifically, I can hope in who is true. A great theologian, Henry Nouwen, has written that joy and sorrow are never separated, and I wonder if anyone in this room is living that. I'm grateful that that can finally resonate with me, because for years it didn't. I spent the first 16 years of my oldest life not leaning into the painful realities of a life of faith amidst mental illness. And instead of paying attention to that tension, I hid myself in unhealthy and controlling behavior and denial of things that didn't make sense or shouldn't have happened because we were faithful. We had done all the right things, and life wasn't going the way that I thought it should. And up until the time we discovered our oldest experienced a traumatic brain injury as a preschooler, I truly believed that if I did the right things, if I prayed, if I read the Bible to myself, and of course to my children with our very fancy quiet times, if I went to church, if I tithed, if I served and showed up every time the doors were open, that my life would be blessed. And I couldn't wait to see the fruit of my faith manifest in healthy, godly kids. The shock to my system was great when it became clear that there is no formula for a perfect, faith-filled life. And my response was to work harder, to try to fix anything and everything, and to learn more. Now, I want to say as a side note, we are all here to learn today. And as I continue to share this with you, I want to make it clear that what I'm going to share next is not an encouragement for us to give up or to stop advocating for our kids or loved ones, learning as much as we can and doing what we are called to do. I'm going to share my experience of trying to do all those things apart from the power of God. I spent so many years avoiding any sort of lamentation and just trying to medicate my pain and fear and confusion with control. My hope was found in my hustle, and I thought I would find contentment in control if I could get it right, if I could tuck it in, if I could figure it all out. Everything would be okay. Until one day in 2015, I couldn't hold it together one more second, and I fell apart. Now, on this side of things, I can honestly tell you that it was one of the best things that ever happened in my life. And I came upon a verse in the book of Colossians that Paul wrote to a confused community. And he wrote this speaking of Jesus. He said, He, Jesus, is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And I spent so much time when my kids were young and struggling, buying into the lie that it was all up to me. And that lie was rooted in fear and confusion. It doubted the goodness of God, and it recast me in the role of savior for my kids. And I lived this for years. It led to a performance-based faith, rampant codependency, and a profound addiction to control that almost devastated my family and exacerbated all the mental health struggles that were happening inside our home. Trying to hold a difficult life and crumbling faith together by my own strength, until finally, in that falling apart, I started to really believe that Jesus is holding it all together. And in that, my daily life started changing, not the circumstances of it, but my approach to it. When I began to believe that He is God and I am not, and that He will do what He says He will do, I don't have it all together, I realized, but I believed that Jesus is holding it all together. That has changed my life, but it hasn't changed my circumstances. My heart, it still breaks often. There are days when pain and disappointment and fear almost overcome me. But even in those days, God gives me eyes to see His tender mercies. And when I hold the disappointment of hopes not realized for my boys, along with the joys of when they have a settled spirit, or the little pockets of happiness and laughter in our home, it changes my day. Lament names what is broken. Truth names what is still good. Faith says both can be true at the same time. So if any of us have a soul that is downcast within us, may we call this to mind and therefore have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is our faithfulness. Great is His faithfulness. And may we say to ourselves, the Lord is my portion, and we can wait on Him. And for those of us that are holding tightly to control, may we remember that Jesus is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, Megan. I'm so glad that you are here. You were right. It's kind of like I want to kind of, I'm just warning you, Heather. Woo. Okay. So glad that you are here. It is awesome to have you, and I get to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Heather Huszti. Wait, before that, because I'm going to give you the big thing. So Madeline, I'm going to start with you. Madeline Hall, stand up, Madeline. Madeline Hall is the Senior Director, Foundation of, I'll get it right, Senior Director, Foundation Relations at CHOC Children's, and she's amazing. And she and Dr. Huszti work very closely together, and so then Dr. Huszti is a licensed psychologist and chief psychologist at CHOC, as well as the section chief for Pediatric Psychology. She's also the director of training for the psychology training program at CHOC, completed her doctoral degree in clinical psychology with an emphasis in family therapy from Texas Tech University. Didn't they play football yesterday? I think I saw them as I was passing through. Okay, I don't know what happened to them, but anyway. And completed an internship and fellowship at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center, and was on faculty there, where she was the director of the Pediatric Psychology program, and joined CHOC in 2002. And she has served as a principal investigator on a number of federally funded research projects with a focus on adherence. And that's all the technical things, but I know Dr. Huszti mostly as a friend, she and Madeline as well, and they are at the heart of why CHOC Children's has an inpatient psychiatric unit for children, now the first in Orange County. And so I want you to welcome Dr. Huszti with a big welcome.
You're so nice. Thank you. All right, thank you all. I'm happy you're here, and I'm excited to talk with you guys today about children's mental health, which is a passion of mine. And I think your sharing really set up, I think, a nice frame for talking about this, because I do think when we talk about children, which are, our most precious thing, right? Our kids and our passion for our family. I think back to one of my friends who's a child life specialist. So, she's great with kids and always wanted kids. And when she had her first kids, I was like, what surprises you about motherhood? And she's like, the constant guilt and worry. I had no idea. And this is someone who, knows all about child development and everything. And I think that's just instilled in us as parents, right? Is I'm worried, I feel like I'm not doing enough. And I think part of what I really want to say is when we talk about kids, I want to say there's hope for children's mental health, and there is no blame for children's mental health. And I think sometimes it's so easy to get caught up into did I cause this? I think psychology and psychiatry as a field did a terrible job back in the 60s and 70s in talking about families and parenting and all of that. I will say parenting can help. Parenting does not cause mental illness, okay? So I just want to say that right up front. And I'm going to start with a couple of statistics just to kind of support that a little bit in a weird way if you think about it. If I could have the first slide, that would be great. Yes, thank you. So when you think about I think a lot of times people think, well, children don't have mental health issues, right? They're like, childhood is carefree, and they're always, many of them are surprised. And I will say early on in our process of saying we need to have a children's inpatient center, we need to expand our children's mental health services, I actually went to a board of supervisor, who I will not name, who said at the end after I went through all this, I had no idea. I was really surprised when you came and wanted to talk to me about mental health. And I said, because you thought kids didn't have mental health problems? And they said, right. And it was like, okay. Actually, 1 in 5 children has a diagnosable mental health condition during their childhood, so before the age of 18. And if you think about mental health conditions that actually cause some kind of impairment in daily functioning, it's 1 in 10. So I just want to put a sort of visual for you about what that means in Orange County, because that's a big number and it's hard to kind of really break that down. What does that mean if we think about Orange County? So we can have the next slide. So you guys have probably been to Angel Stadium, this picture of the stadium. So I want you to imagine that stadium filled with children, and I want you to put 2 more stadiums filled with children next to that. That's how many children in Orange County have a diagnosable mental health condition. It's about 150,000. If you take away 2 of those stadiums, the stadium remaining is about how many kids are actually getting treatment. And in large part, that's because people don't recognize it. We don't think children have mental health conditions. And what I've started to say to people who are, doing the funding and things, there's so much focus on adult mental health, which is super important and absolutely support it. But mental health is a pediatric condition. It's a pediatric disorder. When you think about 75% of individuals with lifelong mental health symptoms and disorders have symptoms before the age of 24, 50% by the age of 14. So if you think about, if we don't think kids have mental health disorders, and I let any condition continue for 10 years without treatment, that's going to make it much more difficult, right? So we really need to recognize and start to address our kids' mental health problems. And the good news is it's probably more effective when we can treat early than when we wait 10, 15 years for things to go on, right? It's sort of like saying, you have diabetes, I'm just gonna wait until you need a limb amputation and then I'll give you insulin, right? We don't do that. We shouldn't do that with mental health either. Now, the thing I'm gonna say in that weird way of, okay, well, how does that have anything to do about my parenting, is that many kids do not have bad parents. Right? Mental illness is not caused by parenting. It's a very complex interaction of the environment, your genetics, your experience. There's lots of things. And we don't even really understand it because it's so complex, right? We talked at the very beginning about the complexity of the human condition and our brain. There's so much we don't understand about how our brain works. So it's so much being a parent to go like, it must be me. But what I'm saying is it's too complex for it just to be you, and it happens too often for it just to be you, okay? So I just want to have that context within there to kind of think about, hey, it's a big issue, and there are things we can do, and there's a lot of hope involved, okay? So I want to go on with all of that. For today, I'm really going to focus on what are some of the most common diagnoses we see in kids, and we see those, and I'm going to talk about them in just a second, at sort of different phases in their childhood. I'm going to focus on those, but certainly during question and answer period, I can talk about other disorders, such as autism or other kinds of things that I'm not going to focus on quite as much right here. So next slide. Oh, good. It's already on there. So as we think about the sort of most common disorders we see in kids, we see anxiety disorders. Those start younger in childhood. We see attention deficit disorder, ADHD, you might have heard it called, which kind of comes out around school age. And then we see mood disorders, so like depression, and that starts to come into the teenage years, okay? Next slide. So this sort of shows you, if you see that blue line, that's anxiety. And you can see how much higher when we think about those early sort of years that anxiety is as compared to ADHD and mood disorders. And then you can see ADHD sort of starting to increase as you come into those school age years. And then around that puberty time, you see depression take off, okay? So there's probably, like I said, when we say genetic components and biological components, there's probably something going on with hormones and development and things like that that probably kick off one thing after at different times. Autism is something you see at birth, but often doesn't sort of manifest itself till about 2 to 4 is when you start to maybe see some symptoms. And eating disorders, substance use disorders, also in teenage years, that's where we start to see them. And then things like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, we tend to see starting in late teenage years to early 20s. That's not universal, so you could have schizophrenia as a child. It just wouldn't be the first thing we'd think about because it would be more common to have it later in childhood, early adulthood. And that's often why I think people, sometimes I hear people say like, my child or my friend's child went to college and then all of a sudden they had this schizophrenia. Like, what happened? And what happened is we go to college about the time when those symptoms start to appear. So that's why you see that sort of increase. Okay, I think if we can skip the next slide and go on to we'll skip that. Okay, let's start talking a little bit about anxiety. And I think this is a great description of sort of generalized anxiety disorder. There's lots of different types of anxiety, but I get anxious about everything. Sometimes I literally don't know why I'm anxious, and nobody understands that. And I think that's what that person suffering with anxiety sort of feels like. And people are always like, what are you worried about? And it's like, I don't know, I just am. And so I think it's really helpful to understand that sometimes it's just our bodies giving off all of those sort of biological and evolutionary signals of there's danger, right? And that anxiety was a great thing for human survival back when we had saber-toothed tigers chasing us, right? You wanted to be anxious about, I shouldn't go behind that rock, because who knows, or there's a dinosaur over there. But that's not life anymore, right? Life isn't having things jumping out at us behind rocks, but it feels like it when you have anxiety, right? But it makes sense, right? We evolved because that kept us alive. So all the people with anxiety in their gene pool stayed alive. Those were our great ancestors, and look what they gave us. Yay. And part of it is we have to, part of the treatment is how do I tamp that down and sort of realize the saber-toothed tiger isn't jumping out at me, right? So next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what some of those symptoms look like. For kids in particular, those somatic symptoms, so that repeated stomach aches, the headaches, sometimes leg pains, those are actually the most common things that kids go to pediatricians about, particularly early sort of school age, right? A lot of times that's anxiety, because kids don't know how to say to you, like, I have this worry, and I'm kind of like at night, my mind races. Like, kids can't tell you that, right? They just go like, my stomach hurts, I can't go to school. And we go like, oh my God, okay, let's take you to the doctor. And that wouldn't necessarily be the first thing we think if we don't think kids have mental health disorders, right? So part of this education or, going out and talking with people is like, actually, that can be a sign. And let's start to look at some patterns. Does it happen every morning before school? Well, that might tell us something, right? Because if it's a medical condition, it's not going to come at a certain time in the day, right? Or does it come before a test? Or does it become before, parents leave, or any of those things? Sleep problems or difficulty concentrating. Sometimes people think anxiety can look like ADHD. We'll talk about ADHD in just a second, the attention deficit disorder. Sometimes the two can co-occur together. And it is, I'll just say as a little aside, when we're talking about children's mental health, it is important to get someone who has some experience with children's mental health, right? Because a lot of these symptoms, as I go through them, you're going to be like, didn't you just talk about that with the other disorder? So really trying to, how do I know what is normal for kids, what is different for kids, and how do I sort of extract, is that symptom anxiety? Is that symptom of difficulty concentrating, attention deficit disorder? And as a psychiatrist I work with often says, a kid who's having, a meltdown or a tantrum, that could be a tantrum, could be depression, could be anxiety, and the kid can't stop and tell you. It's just like, I'm overwhelmed. I'm just overwhelmed, and my circuits are just overloaded, and I'm just going to have a meltdown. And every kid has a meltdown at some point, right? I'm sure all of us did as kids. I certainly did. And I know I was walking through an airport once, and here's this child having a meltdown, and the coolest parent ever who's just like, just gonna let it happen. And how hard that was to have people streaming around them. And I almost wanted to go up to her and go like, I'm a child psychologist, good job. But I thought probably that would just make things worse. So those sleep problems, difficulty concentrating, behavioral changes, so that moodiness, the short temper, that irritability kind of stuff. Nervous habits, so biting nails, tics, those kinds of things. And then a refusal to go to school or getting into trouble at school. So all of those things can be a part of anxiety for kids. So next slide, what are some helpful tips? Because not every kid with anxiety needs to have therapy. But there are some things we can do that can help support kids. So helping kids recognize what it is. How do I name it? There's a reason we say, hey, help kids understand what emotions are. Because kids aren't born knowing what is sad, what is anxious, what is depressed, what's happy. They don't necessarily know. So how do I help them learn a language to sort of go like, oh, your tummy hurts because you're going, to your friend's house for a party. I wonder, are you feeling a little worried? What else is happening in your body? How do you recognize that? Because once we put a name to it, we can do something, right? We know what it is. It's not as scary. Listening and showing support. So this is that delicate balance, right? Because anxiety is this weird thing. I'm sure you guys have all had it. How many people have had a problem and something that's like, oh my God, I just don't even want to think about it, and you ignore it? Anyone ever done that? Yeah, okay. Does it get better? No. Yeah, no. Does it generally get worse and worse, and we sort of learn as adults, like, I probably just have to double down and do it? Yeah, okay. Kids don't know that, right? For kids, it's like, hey, if I just stay away from the saber-toothed tiger, everything will be fine. And sometimes as parents, right, it's like, oh, it's okay. No, you don't have to go do that. But what happens to the fear and anxiety when we do that? It does, right? And then you start avoiding more and more things because anxiety just loves to creep out, right? But anxiety is a weird thing. It's like a wave, right? And it comes at you, and you look at the wave, and you go, oh my gosh, it's going to kill me. I can see it. It's coming. And it's so big. And if you sort of stand there, the wave crests, right? And breaks. And then you're like, oh, okay, I can do it. So part of how we help our kids is we help them stand and watch the wave break, right? As opposed to going like every time we see a wave at the beach, I run up to the concession stand because it's so scary, right? So I want you to be able to stay. Now, I don't have to go in the middle and have the wave hit me in my chest, but I can stand at the shore and have it go through my ankles, and then I'm going to move a little bit more in. So that's the kind of thing we do to sort of help. We support kids. We don't make fun. We don't say, my dad was a big run around the block, just ignore it. Just go. You don't have to do that. But at the same time, you need to help your child be like, okay, so what are the coping strategies you can use to at least make a step towards facing that anxiety? And then, help them with coping strategies, and I'm going to show you some a little bit later in our time today. And that can be deep breathing. And sometimes it seems like you don't understand. It's going to kill me. What is taking a couple of deep breaths going to do? But there's actually a physiological reason that it helps. What happens when we're anxious is our whole nervous system gets activated, right? And stuff is just going off everywhere because that saber-toothed tiger's right there. So I am reacting as though it is. The great thing about deep breaths is, and you got to do it because if you breathe like this, you're just making your whole nervous system gets even more activated because what you're telling your nervous system is like, there's no air, I can't breathe. So it does not make you any less anxious. But when you take a nice deep breath, and I often teach kids of put your hand right here and make this hand move. So it's a nice deep breath, and then let it out to a count of 4. Now this helps a couple things. Physiologically, it helps your body go, oh, it's not so bad. We're breathing deeply. We've got oxygen. We're good. So it helps calm that nervous system down. But what also happens, so think about when you're anxious. Have you ever been really anxious about something and then you get involved in a TV show or your kids tell you a cool story and then you go, oh wait, I was anxious, right? Because our brains, while our brains are complex, they're kind of limited sometimes in how much stuff we can pay attention to at any given time. So anything we can do to put a break in that anxiety cycle also calms us down, right? So saying to kids, I want you to count to 4 as you breathe in. I want you to breathe out to 4. I'm making you do something else. Your mind is going somewhere else than that saber-toothed tiger is going to leap at me at any moment, right? Nope, it's not. I'm breathing. I'm good. And then practice those small steps, right? So, again, you don't have to go in the water and go swimming, but I'm going to go to the water and let it come up to my ankles, and I'm not going to run away screaming. That's awesome. Look what you did. You did something better than what you could do last time. So we're praising steps towards it. You don't have to conquer the fear. You just have to take some small steps towards it, right? And that builds kids' self-efficacy and belief of oh, I know how to do this, rather than it's so scary I cannot tolerate it. The last thing is, because we know biology plays a role, I'm sorry to say, sometimes anxious kids have anxious parents because our biology plays a role, right? So as we are going, oh, this is so scary, what do kids do? Like, oh, okay, it's really scary, right? Because my parents say it's scary. So that's a really hard thing to do, is how do I monitor? Now, again, that doesn't cause your child's anxiety, but it can help their anxiety by going, okay, we're going to take a little deep breath. I'm going to do it with you, and we're going to practice together. So you show them and demonstrate to them, this is how we can manage anxiety. So these are some things you can do. Try these tips. And it may be that a child's anxiety is greater than just those tips, right? So when do we worry? So next slide. So a couple times when we worry. Severe anxiety is unrealistic, right? So if you sort of think about, I might worry about, I'm going to go out and play soccer and I might, get kicked by someone. Okay, that's like realistic, right? Soccer's I was just watching one of my friend's sons play soccer yesterday. I mean, it could be kind of a tough game, right? But if I'm just walking down the street and I'm worried a kid's going to come up and kick me, that's probably unrealistic, right? Probably people are not just waiting, at least the streets I'm walking on, waiting to kick me. Severe anxiety is out of proportion. So if you say, like a high school sophomore might be like, oh man, I'm like stressed about the SAT, I'm taking it next week. That's pretty realistic, right? But with generalized anxiety disorder, you might have a kid stay awake at night stressing about it when they're in 5th grade. And you might be, it's like, okay, that's years away. We don't need to stress about that right now, right? So that's unrealistic. It's being, it's out of proportion. It's also being overly self-conscious. So, someone, we all are kind of a little anxious when we meet someone new, right? I get a little anxious coming down and talking in front of people because I don't know you yet. I don't know how it's going to go. So that's like regular anxiety, right? That's what we all have. But if I had anxiety where I'm not even going to come into this room because I'm just sure you're all going to look at me and judge me and it's going to be awful and terrible, so I really shouldn't give talks anymore, that would be out of proportion, right? And that would be me being overly self-conscious about myself and my anxiety. Anxiety is also, severe anxiety is also unwanted and uncontrollable. So the idea of, you drop your kindergartner off at school and they're kind of like, I'm going to miss you today. That's that level of unwanted, but they get over it. Unwanted and uncontrollable is your kid cries all day at school because they're worried you're going to die because they're not there with you, right? And when we see kids like that, right, I'm still worried about my parents. And then severe anxiety leads to avoidance. So that's where I'm not going to go to that party. I'm not going to go and do that fun thing. I'm not going to go out to the fair. I'm not going to do those kinds of things because it's too scary. Too many things are going to happen. And the more we let anxiety sort of grow, the smaller and smaller and more constrained our world gets, right? So those are the times when treatment might be helpful. So next slide. So the good news is actually anxiety is very treatable. It responds well. And it responds well to talk therapy. So often you can do different forms of psychotherapy of some kind. Cognitive behavioral therapy is something we use often with kids, where we identify people's thoughts, how those thoughts are sort of linked to your emotions, and how you can manage those. And then we also help increase your coping skills, so teaching breathing, learning meditation. And believe it or not, kids as young as kindergartners can learn meditation. I know it sometimes seems like, okay, seriously, a kindergartner can sit still for like more than a minute, but actually they kind of get into it, and it helps them learn how to, kind of calm their body. And Coping Cat is a well-known anxiety treatment for kids, so that's, an evidence-based treatment. So we can do that. Another thing when you've got kids like with obsessive compulsive disorder is what we call exposure and response prevention, ERP. So what happens there, this sounds like super scary, but what happens there is you start to expose kids to things. Well, first you teach them coping skills. Then you expose them to the things they're scared of. So like kids who have like phobia about germs. You're like, okay, First, we're going to like step in the bathroom, and we're just going to stand, you're going to breathe, and then you can step out of the bathroom. And then you slowly get them more and more exposure and teach them, I can respond. Yeah. Yeah. So great questions, thank you. So Coping Cat, Coping Cat is the name of an evidence-based treatment. So that means it's a therapy that's been studied with many, many kids, thousands of kids, and is shown to reduce their anxiety. So it's just an example of a type of treatment you could use. The dogs, and we use pet therapy dogs at CHOC, so they can be super helpful. And it's that same thing, we talked about our nervous system gets all like, and that sometimes, for a lot of kids, that dog can just be like, Now, unfortunately, there are also the kids whose dog bit them, right? So, yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 Good. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And I think you're making a great point that I'll make here. And the reason I talk about a number of different things is different things fit for different people, and we don't quite yet know, like I can tell because of your genetics or something else that this treatment's going to work with you. So we usually start with what do we know works with most people and what has the least side effects. So we're going to start like with cognitive behavioral therapy. And if that doesn't work, we've got other things, right? We do know, and kids with autism, to your point, sometimes respond to animals in a way they don't respond to humans. So that's a good thing to think about. But the idea is we sort of move down the list, right? And we match the kid to the thing that works. And that's where I really want to talk about hope as well, is just because one thing didn't work doesn't mean nothing's going to work. And I think sometimes in our society we want a quick fix. It's like, hey, give me the pill. Give me the, I went once, didn't work. No, it's because our brain is very complex. And our brain is very good at being what we call parsimonious. So our brain is good at the thing that we do most often, it's very quick at, right? So if we go around and go like, oh my God, it's very scary to go to school, it's very scary to go to school, it's very scary to go to school, then those thoughts get very fast in our brain, and there's actually physiological things that happen in your brain. It's a little bit like lifting weights and getting bigger muscles. We have a thing called the myelin sheath over our neurons. That's how thoughts communicate. We get more myelin sheaths the more we think about certain thoughts. Those pathways get faster. So when we try and change that thought, it's slower. It takes a little time to catch up. So it takes a little practice, right? We have to keep doing it even if we're sort of like, that didn't work the first time I did it. And I'll just give you as an example, cross your arms the way you usually cross your arms. Okay. Now cross them the other way. How's that feel? Yeah, right? Change is hard. Even if it's inconsequential change, it's hard. So if we think about, I'm trying to change the fact that the saber-toothed tiger is going to kill me, it's going to take a little bit longer, right? So, but those things work. Now, for sometimes we have kids where I can't even engage in the coping strategies because my anxiety is so overwhelming. So in that case, we'd think about medication. So selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, big name, that's why we call it SSRIs, can be a medication that can be helpful and is safe for children. And then sometimes once I take the medication, get my body calmed down enough, then I can engage the coping skills. Once I get good at those, I can stop the medicine. So just sort of in those different treatments. All right, we'll move on to ADHD. And I realize I can talk forever, so I'm going to try and go a little faster. So ADHD, this is sort of, anyone have a kid like this? Anyone? Yeah. Anyone was a kid like this? Yeah. My mom and I had lots of discussions about shoving everything like that under my bed is not cleaning the room. I thought it was, but had a lot of discussions. So there's your kid with ADHD. Next slide. So I'm sorry, I think you're going to have to click on each one of these. So inattention, obviously, is one of the big areas, right? My focus sort of shifts, and it's very hard for me to stay with one thing. The hyperactivity impulsive, so that's the kid, if they were giving this talk, they'd be off the stage, on the stage, off the stage, maybe they'd sit in that chair, then they'd come back. So it's the kid who's just like, always, I'm on the go. Then we have, to diagnose ADHD, it has to occur in 2 or more settings, right? So if you're like, I don't see anything, it's at home, but at school, this kid's like bouncing off the walls, I'd be having some other hypothesis before I'd say this child has ADHD, right? It's probably something about the school, some things like that. So there has to be some evidence of impairment. So, there's some people who are just active people who maybe look like they're not concentrating, and it doesn't impair, they're getting A's in school, they're doing fine, they have friends. Okay, I'm not gonna make a diagnosis there. I'm not gonna treat something that's not causing impairment. Signs have to occur before the age of 12, so if you come to me and say, oh, this happened when I was 17, and nobody noticed anything before, I'm gonna have other hypotheses than ADHD. It has to be inconsistent with developmental level. I did have a parent once tell me that their 3-year-old would not sit down and read a book quietly for half an hour, and I had to tell them that unfortunately that was developmentally appropriate. Which they were very sad about. But that's, you just have to think about, okay, what's that developmental level? A 3-year-old is going to run around a lot. They're not going to be very attentive. But a 9-year-old, okay, that you should be able to calm down and sit in a chair. Symptoms have to last 6 months or longer, and it's about 11% of kids 4 to 17 years of age. So you can see it's a pretty common thing. There's probably some, and if you think about it, there's some professions where a little ADHD is a good thing, right? And so there's probably some evolutionary good things about having ADHD. But it's also good to sort of learn to control some of those things. Next slide. And you can see childhood to adulthood, you'll see things sort of shift. So like kids might be very physically impulsive, adults might be verbally impulsive. We probably all have friends who are just like, I don't know why I said that, but I just couldn't stop myself. So that's sort of how that goes. That inattention, it generally tends to stay. That hyperactivity tends to become restlessness. So it's that, playing with your ring, tapping your foot when you're sitting, those kinds of things. You're probably, by adulthood, you've learned I can't get up and just walk around in the same way that as kids we might do. Okay, next slide. Okay, so if you have a kid with ADHD, what do I do? One thing is, and I don't mean this in a bad way. Teachers know a lot about kids. I always will pay attention to a teacher. But if a teacher says your kid has ADHD and you need to go and get them on meds, they're not diagnosing kids. So I would always say get an evaluation before. And you can start with the pediatrician. Because there may be other things, right? And we don't want to mask the other things with medication. When you have a kid who's all over the place and getting into trouble all the time, they get very discouraged because what do we do all the time? Don't do that, stop that, why are you running? Go over there. And what do we do when they're being good and sitting still? Right? Yeah, thank God I can go cook dinner now, And so how do kids know what's the right thing to do if we don't, and how easily can they get discouraged if we're not going like, I love how you're sitting there and coloring so quietly. That is awesome. Here's the other thing about kids. Kids want your attention more than, it is the most powerful thing in the world to kids. They'll deny it, but I'm just telling you, I see them behind the scenes. It is the most powerful, even for teenagers who act like they wish you would disappear from the face of the earth. Your attention and your praise is like gold. So use it. It's a very powerful thing you have, right? And the more and when kids don't get your attention for being good, attention for being bad's perfectly fine. It's still attention. It's not fine for us, but we don't want to have the child learn that the only way people attend to me is when I mess up, right? Because then you start to believe that about yourself. And what we really want to do is, hey, I want to maximize all of your abilities and strengths. So let me tell you what those are, and let me point those out to you. It can be incredibly powerful. And I say this to teachers all the time too, who have that same sort of like, really? It's like, yes, please praise your class. So that can be helpful. Ignoring negative behavior, right? A lot of times as parents, like, it's so important that our kids do well that we want to correct them for every single thing they do, right? So the more that you can sort of be like, okay, that's actually not that big a deal. It's not dangerous, not destroying property. And if my attention is the thing that drives behavior, what happens if everything I pay attention to is negative behavior? It's going to increase it, right? You're going to have more negative behavior. So those things I can let go. It's okay. Not going to, it's not going to hurt them. And I'm going to really focus some of my energy and time and attention on, I like how you're doing that. I also would say it's great to focus on the behavior and not the goodness of the child, right? So if you say, oh, you're being such a good boy right now, for a kid that becomes internalized, then I'm bad when I misbehave, right? But if instead you say, I love how you're sitting quietly and you're coloring that picture, that's awesome. Then they can start to understand, I am loved and am valuable no matter what I do, right? That's the base. I am loved and valuable. And who doesn't need that in their lives, right? And sometimes I mess up in my behavior, but that's okay because I am loved and valued underneath, right? So these are these small things that really send home that message to kids that sometimes I think in the busyness of life, it's just, and trying to raise a good child, that we forget, right? And we focus on one thing. Using consequences and rewards, when you do that, saying to a kid with ADHD, hey, you do this for 2 weeks or 4 weeks, and then you'll get a video game, is like, what? 4 weeks might be enough of saying, hey, when you get married, I'm going to give you a wedding gift. It's just not going to have much impact, right? But if I say at the end of the day, in this hour, and it can be small, right? It doesn't have to be monetary. It can be like, you get to pick dessert tonight. Kids love that. Or I'm going to play a game with you. Remember, your attention is the most valuable thing to a kid. Me sitting down and playing a game with you, it's like gold, man. So, those kinds of things, it doesn't have to be monetary, but do them with the behavior. And the other thing is also kids' sense of time is a lot more constrained than we think. So I often have parents come in and go like, I grounded them for the rest of the semester. And what kids hear is, I'm in life prison, because I can't, a semester is like forever because their lives are much shorter, right, than ours. They don't have that perspective. So one of the things I often say to parents is, okay, let's use this, ground them for a short period of time, and let them work time off if they're good. And if they're not, they get more time added. But then kids start to see like, oh, my behaviors have an effect on what happens, right? And for a kid with ADHD, remember, who doesn't attend very well, they miss out on consequences come from my behavior. I mean, they truly, I swear to you, I know as a parent it may feel like they're just saying that. No, they truly cannot get that link. And that is where a lot of their social problems come from with kids with ADHD, because they just don't see the links because they don't have the attention span to do it. So these are ways that you can help them. Developing routines and using cues to remind kids. So one of the things I often say to parents as we're trying to diagnose a kid is, okay, so when a kid gets home from school and you say, take your coat off, hang it up, grab a snack, and then go upstairs and grab your soccer clothes. How many steps in do they get before they forget? And they're like, 1, right? That is diagnostic of ADHD. They literally cannot remember the rest of it because I hear the first part, and then I can't attend to the rest of it. So break it down and say, I need you to go hang your coat up, or I'm going to have like a little pictorial thing right by the door, and it's going to have pictures of hang your coat up, go upstairs, grab your snack. But that's what kids need, and that's how they're going to start to remember the sequence of what I need to do, right? Then using frequent breaks. I think the other thing that happens is sometimes we want kids, particularly when they're 12, to like, you sit down and get that homework done, and it feels like, am I being like overly, lenient if they take a break every so often? But for kids with ADHD, they need that break. So you can use a timer and be like, you're going to work until the timer goes off, then you're going to have 5 minutes, we're going to set the timer, and then you're going to work a little bit more. They need those breaks. Okay. The other thing about kids with ADHD, I often have parents say, well, they can't have ADHD because they can, play video games for hours at a time, or they're incredibly interested in this one thing, right? That's the thing about ADHD and attention. If I'm interested in it, I am laser focused, right? And I'll have my interest. I can tell you 1,000 things about cars. My math homework, I don't remember what the teacher said, right? So those things that don't have interest, I'm not attending to. Okay, next slide. So if you have a kid with ADHD, school accommodations are super helpful. So you can consider talking to the school about an individualized education plan. You have to make a written request to schools. And sometimes some schools are great, and some schools are like, well, they never gave us a written request. I'm like, did you tell them? And the school's like, well, no, they should have known. Because you don't know what you don't know, right? I mean, you don't know, but schools are like, I do this every day. How could they not know? So it's not that anyone's trying to not make it work, but it's just for you guys to know. You make a written request to the school. The school does have a timeline of 15 days to respond, to start to say, here's the plan of how we're going to address your response. And then they have 50 days to complete the assessment. So one of the things I often say to parents is, if you have a concern and you have a child that you think needs accommodations in school, do it at the beginning of the school year, because if you add that up, that's 65 days. That's 2 months. If we wait until March, it's not going to happen until the next school year, right? So we want to get in there early. And accommodations can include all sorts of things. We can modify the classroom. Do you sit up front? Do you have an aide? Because it's hard for kids to remember, do I send notes home with you because this is what my lecture was? All sorts of different things that schools can do depending on what the kid's symptoms are. They can have a resource specialist. They can get additional support services. They can go into special classes if needed to get that extra support. So schools can do a lot. Schools have money to do a lot. So ask for what your child needs. There's the IEP, which is a more drawn out process, as you can see, and it does hold legal sway. So if there's something on a kid's IEP plan, the school must do it, and they must meet with you at least annually to review how is your child doing and have they done all of those things. So it's very powerful. But schools can also do what's called a 504 plan, which is offer accommodations in a slightly less sort of legalistic way. And sometimes that's a good way to start because they can do it right away. And you just say, hey, my kid needs these accommodations. I'm wondering, like one of the things we often do is, hey, for a kid with ADHD and you give them 8,000 math problems for homework, they don't need that to learn the concept. How about we give them enough homework problems to learn the concept, and then they don't need to do any more. So those kinds of things can be under the 504 plan. And finally, if you do have a child that you're kind of either with ADHD or some other issue that you're wanting accommodations at school and you're just like, I'm having trouble navigating my school, there's a program called TASK, which is, I can't remember what the T and the A stand for. SK is Special Kids, but that's the website. They have a Southern California chapter, a chapter in Orange County, and their website has like thousands and thousands of materials to kind of help guide you. So it's a great resource to use, and they'll help hold your hand through that process as well. Okay, next slide. Treatment. Therapy or counseling, behavioral therapy is probably most effective, where I kind of start to a behavior goes with a consequence. Those school resources, the IEP, kids may benefit from medication, but sometimes with some of the things we've already talked about, they can do fine without medication. So we always start with that. If you need medication, we also talk about the start slow, go low, start slow, with the idea being start with the smallest dose possible, and then sort of we titrate to, are they doing better in school? And you don't give medication to the point of like, oh, I got straight A's and everything, because they probably, you just want them to do well. They don't need to be superstars, and you don't want to it's a stimulant. The medication for ADHD is a stimulant, so that can affect kids' growth and appetite and sleep. So we want to find the right level, right, where we've got kids achieving and working to their potential, but not over-medicating, if that makes sense. So finding that balance. Okay, so when would you need treatment? If the child is engaging in dangerous and self-injurious behavior, if you're seeing impairment in any kind of functioning at school, with the family, with friends, if you've tried these strategies we've talked about and it hasn't resolved, then that would be a good time for treatment. Or if there's some reason why this isn't working, I can't implement this either because of my home situation, the school situation, something else that's going on, then treatment, a lot of times, it's not fair, but sometimes when I call the school and go, hey, this is Dr. Huszti, these are some accommodations, they're going to respond to me in a way they're not going to respond to parents sometimes, which is unfortunate, but use us, right? We're there to help. Okay, next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about depression. And so this is really in the teenage years that we start to see depression. And as we think about depression, it really is a disorder that affects the emotions. It affects your thoughts. Like when you're depressed, it is. Has anyone been to the La Brea tar pits? Anyone been? Yeah, okay. So, you go in there and they have the plungers where you pick it up and it feels like you're the animal in the mud and there's like this tar and all this black stuff. To me, that's what depression feels like to people it's like this black stuff is just bringing me down in every way possible. Emotionally, physically, I just don't have any energy. My thoughts are black and tarry. And my behavior, I withdraw from others. I don't want to be around people. I think bad things about myself. And to me, that's the visual, right? And I'll often talk to people with depression and go, is this what it feels like? And they're like, yes. So it can be helpful just to be like, I understand. I know what this feels like. Next slide. So this is looking at leading causes of death for 5 to 19-year-olds. Injuries are our number one cause, and both for the 5 to 14 and 15 to 19-year-olds. So 5 to 14-year-olds are the blue bars, 15 to 19-year-olds are the orange bar. So injuries, homicide, 1 and 2. Suicide is the third leading cause of death across both age ranges, 10 to 14 as well as 15 to 19. Was the second leading cause of death. Unfortunately, deaths by gun violence leaped over that. But nonetheless, if that's the third leading cause of death amongst our kids, we need to be doing something about this, right? Because that is treatable. That's something that we can modify and that we want to modify. And when you look at 15 to 19-year-olds, if you add up heart conditions, cancer, birth defects, COVID, a lot of the things we worry about for our kids, still fewer deaths per year than deaths by suicide. So again, an important area for us to be monitoring and doing things about. Next slide. Okay, and this is just to bring home to Orange County. This orange line is that year that COVID happened, and that red bar is in March, mid-March when COVID happened. And you can see these are kids coming into our emergency room in a psychiatric crisis, which means I can't keep myself safe. I'm thinking of killing myself. I'm thinking of hurting someone else. And what you can see in 2022, which is that blue line, is that's a 50% increase over what happened prior to COVID. Now, The 2024 line is about 10% reduction over our peak, so we're starting to see things maybe start to stabilize a little bit, thankfully. But it's a 50% increase over COVID, and I think we're seeing that in children's mental health kind of across the board. Is COVID threw gasoline on what was already smoldering embers, right? Now, the good news is we're trying to do a lot more to address it, and hopefully we're starting to see some movement. And you guys can be a part of that by bringing this message out into the community that kids do have mental health needs. We do want to intervene early. And let's continue to bring down the effects of COVID. Yeah, so I could talk about that for an hour, and I won't because my time is limited. Okay, next thing. So the CDC looks every other year for what are, and sorry, I'm seeing the numbers did not transfer over. So the number where that 26 is under experienced persistent feelings or sadness should be 20, sorry, get the right year, should be from 2009 and then up through 2023, every other year. So 2009, 2011. So this is the first data we have, the 2021 and 2023 after COVID. But as you can see, in the red stoplights are saying over the last 10 years, we've not gotten better. Now, there's a little stabilization between 2021 and 2023, but we've got 40% of U.S. high school seniors, and this was a sample of about 13,000 kids, so it's not a small sample. 40% said that in the past year they experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness that lasted at least 2 weeks, which is sort of a measure of depression. And when you say, I seriously considered attempting suicide, 20% of kids said in the last year, I seriously considered attempting suicide. Now, that number is around 35% for teenage girls, and about 12%, 15% for teenage boys. So there's a big gender difference between the two. But to me, that's like, I can't have 1 in 5 high school students having those thoughts. Like, we got to do something about that, right? We got to really be serious about depression. We really got to think about how do we help support our kids? How do we help adults around them support them, right? Instead of like heaping more and more things on kids and more things to try and deal with, how do we help them get more coping strategies? How do we help identify these kids? So one of the things we're doing at CHOC is every child who comes into our emergency department who's 12 or older gets screened for suicidal ideation, because sometimes we can catch kids early and get treatment when people were like, I didn't even know. Our primary care clinics for kids 12 and up screen for depression at least annually, to be sure, like, what's going on? How can we get you services? How can we get you connected? And then we're starting in our specialty care clinics. So those would be our clinics that treat kids with cancer, kids with GI problems, kids with neurological problems, with headaches, things like that. We're also screening for suicidal ideation. And we have a team of psychologists that can go out and make sure the kid is okay, find the treatment for them. But these kinds of things are really important, right? The schools are putting more mental health services into them, and that's important too, right? Because we want to start getting kids these kinds of into services early, and not wait for a child to say, I need to be in the emergency room, or worse yet, something tragic happening. So we really want to pay attention to those numbers. Okay, next slide. I'll just say in our primary care clinics, and we've done over 14,000 screenings since we started, and about 25% have some sort of symptoms, most of those mild. But we found 6% who've said, I've had some suicidal ideation. And most of those would be, the parents are like, I had no idea. So again, these kinds of screenings can save lives. And so we do that referral and follow-up. All right, next slide. When do I worry about a kid who's depressed? when I see them starting to withdraw from social interactions, so that sort of, and this is a little hard because teenagers don't want to be around adults, so it's hard to sometimes be like, is it just you don't want to be around me, or is it that you're really withdrawing? So you want to look both what's happening at home, but am I going out with friends? You can ask teachers at school, like, are they hanging out like by themselves at lunch, or are they with people? Like, there are ways you can check on that. Are they isolating themselves from family? Did you see a drop in school performance? Not engaging in things that were previously fun, so those kids are like, I don't want to play video games anymore, and they used to be like hours on them, or I'm just not interested in that hobby anymore. Those would be things that you'd start to be like, let me look for some other things. Things when you see teens giving away their possessions, or having that sort of preoccupation with death or discussing death a lot, I would say that would be a point that I might call my pediatrician and say, hey, could we bring them in and just look at this a little bit and have an idea. But it's also okay to ask kids. Asking about, are you thinking about killing yourself? It does not put an idea in someone's head. Okay? It really can be life-saving. So being able to, and that idea of, hey, earlier in life, remember we talked about teaching kids what emotions are? Teaching kids what emotions are is a good foundation that when they're teenagers, being able to say, I'm kind of worried about you because I see you not going out with your friends anymore and some other things happening. Anything, what's going on for you? And if they, say nothing, get away, whatever, you still can ask that, I am worried about you and I care about you. And I'm wondering if you're having thoughts about killing yourself. It's okay to say those words. It's hard to say those words, but it's okay to say those words, okay? It's not going to cause them to think about something they weren't thinking about otherwise, and like we said, it can be life-saving. It is important to pair that with, I care about you. You matter. You have meaning in this world. There is nothing more protective for someone who's depressed than knowing that there are people who care about them and that they have value in this world. Okay? So that is a really important thing that you can do in those moments. All right, I'm going to skip the next slide and then go to the next. I'm sorry, I'm really putting you through your paces today, aren't I? And I know I'm getting I'm over already, but I'm just going to finish up depression and then am I okay? All right. You'll stop me when I'm not okay. So just some things that are helpful for dealing with kids who are depressed. I think a lot of times you see someone who's down, especially a kid, you kind of want to be like, oh, you've got like your whole life ahead of you. Look at all these great things. How does that help when you guys anyone experience depression? Yeah. How does it help to have people tell you got nothing to be depressed? Yeah. No, it doesn't work at all, right? That is not helpful. Because your brain immediately goes, oh, yes, I do, because that's what your brain's telling you, right? So if you've got a child or a loved one who's depressed, you really, again, want to lead with how much you care about the person. I care about you. You're important to me. I want to help and support you, right? You want to be sensitive in how you approach the topic. So, a lot of times we want to tell people what to do, right, when they're feeling, especially our kids, because we hate to see our kids not feeling well. But really, it can be much more effective to say things like, I've just noticed, and like name the behavior, so you can say, this is why I'm worried about it. These are the things I've noticed. And would it be all right if I talked to you a little bit about that? You're asking people for permission, right? Because basically then you're opening up people to say like, okay, I'm ready to listen to you. Even if they say no, you've planted the seed and you can come back to it, right? But never ask the question, is it okay I tell you something, if you're not going to take no for an answer. So be ready for no. It's okay. You can always come back. But it's a good way to start if you can. This is really hard. Listen, don't talk. So if you sort of think, I should be asking one question per 3 sentences from the other person. That's just something you can stick in your head. Really hard to do when someone's suffering and they're saying things to you that you want to be like, but it's important to know. And sometimes the saying of it, have you guys ever had this experience? When I say it, I go like, wait, that's not right, right? Sometimes, or just, I was talking to a friend the other night who was just, saying, I'm struggling right now and I haven't told anyone, and you're the first person I'm telling, that by the end of that, she felt better, right? Just the sharing the burden is huge. So in those moments, it's hard to hear, but recognize that's treatment. Just listening and saying, it's not too scary for me. I'm gonna be here for you. I can listen to you. It's okay. I'm walking this with you. Can be so important. You can offer to say, again, I'm happy to work on trying to find some professional help for you if you sort of feel like this is too much. And if they say no, that's okay. I'm going to come back and say it again. It's all right. But you can start to broach that topic. And I find for teens, one of the things I usually start with teenagers, because I get a lot of teens who come in and, right, in our first session. So one of the things I say is like, did your parents make you come? Yes. And say, okay, so we're making a deal. The deal is you're going to come for 4 times. And we're going to see if we can come up with something and figure out some solutions. And if after 4 times, maybe I'm not the therapist for you, and that's okay too. We'll find you another therapist. And usually then that takes the pressure off the teen, right? I'm not the enemy because you only got to see me 4 times. And if I'm good enough at my job, by the 3rd time they should be hooked. And sometimes we're not a match, and that's okay too. That's no reflection on me. It's just like, I'm going to find someone else for you. But it's a good way to kind of get kids and teens involved, right? Like you have some agency. You don't have to go forever, but give it a try. Let's just give it a try. Help them balance obligations with self-care. In today's world, I think sometimes we're like, I want you to play soccer and baseball, and it's going to be really hard to get into college. And oh my God, you're in 5th grade and you don't have anything on your activities list. So being able to kind of be like, you know what? Kids' brains are sort of meant for some downtime. So sometime just kind of hanging out and daydreaming is actually what teen brains need to develop. So work that in. Self-care is good. It's good for all of us. We should all learn that lesson. How do we take care of ourselves? How do we find the joy along with the sadness, right, as you talked about? Because there's always joy. There's always something in there. But we can't do it if we're not quiet a little bit of the time, or we don't stack things up so much. Encourage movement and exercise. We know for moderate depression, I know I hate hearing this because, like, oh my God, that means I have to like walk or exercise. But moderate depression responds to exercise almost as well as to medication, and sometimes better. So I know, it's hard when you're depressed to feel like I want to get up and move, but our bodies are meant to move. It helps our brain work better. It helps address all of those negative thoughts. It's really hard to be out in nature and be like, everything sucks because, the sun, there's like, and our bodies are like meant to respond to nature, I know we got up here and Madeline was like, it's like the treehouse. And I'm like, this is a great space for this meeting, right? Because there's nature. It's very grounding. Okay, another thing, I actually have this for my own anxiety, but also for depression, it's great, is have a box of things that bring you joy, or things that engage you when you're feeling particularly down. Or what are some things that are reminders of the good things in life? When I was young, one of the things my mom said, or when I was about a teenager, I think, maybe a little bit older, my mom said to me, keep those cards that people send you that say nice things on them. And I did actually have a box full of, and I did it for many, many years. And when you're really depressed, it is really hard to stay depressed when you read through a box of like cards and things that people have sent. By the couple of them in, you're like, oh, I remember that. That was great. So having those kinds of things for anxiety, it's great to have things like, here's a puzzle I like, here's, because different things work at different times. So it's nice to have a bunch of different things, but it's ready, right? Because your brain doesn't think well when you're depressed. Your brain does not think well when it's anxious. So it's nice to just be like, okay, just take my box. I'm going to go through it and I'm going to find the thing that's helping me in the moment. I have a terrible fear of flying, which is really great when you talk a lot and go to meetings a lot. So I have a bag that I take with me that's got all my stuff. Here's my music, here's a book, here's, something to do with my hands, here's my coloring book. I'm sure people sitting next to me when I pull out my little coloring and my pencils are like, but different things work at different times, right? So we just have our stuff and our coping things at hand. And then help to identify those early warning signs. What are early warning signs to let me know that this is sort of slipping up again and I need to attend to it and really take care of my mental health? Next slide, just some evidence-based treatments if we're seeking treatment. Again, cognitive behavioral therapy works great. Again, identifying thoughts, increasing coping skills. Coping Cat works for this as well. Dialectical and behavioral therapy is an evidence-based treatment that works particularly for adolescents with suicidal ideation or self-injurious behaviors, cutting. What it does is really teach you how to manage those overwhelming emotions, right? Those emotions that make you feel like, I just am jumping out of my skin. I just cannot manage another minute. This teaches you a lot of skills of how do I put a stop to that. So I'll leave you all with one. Those moments when you're like, I'm overwhelmed. Actually, if you put an ice cube on your wrist, it actually changes your sort of physiology to just immediately go, what's going on? And all of a sudden you're attending to, there's something very cold happening as opposed to I'm overwhelmed, right? So those things that make a kind of break in those thoughts. And then also has skills coaching. Mindfulness-based stress reduction is something that is a great thing to address all sorts of different mood disorders. You can find 8 and 12-week training sessions around the county, but that's what you're looking for, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and it teaches you those skills. And then again, sometimes the depression is just too strong, and I'm going to need some kind of medication to help me manage the depression enough that I can start to engage with these coping skills, right? So again, I might try therapy first. If that doesn't work, I can go on to medication. But most research would suggest the two together when it's severe are best. I wouldn't do medication necessarily just by itself because you're not learning the coping skills that help you manage those feelings, right? But the medication is fabulous when you need it because it helps you be able to use these other things, right? And again, that's what the literature shows is the two together can be super helpful. Okay, next slide. I'm here to tell you on all of these things I've talked about, and trust me, I've devoted over 30 years of my life to this. Treatment works. It really does. There's hope, okay? And if one treatment doesn't work, another will. Or if one therapist doesn't work, another will. If one medication doesn't work, another will. And part of that is why sometimes we need to try more than one thing, is because we don't know what's best for each person yet. We're still pretty much in our infancy of knowing how to match a treatment to a person, right? We're learning, but we've got more ways to go. So don't give up. There is hope. It does work. It does get better. For moderate depression in particular, exercise and talk therapy can be helpful. Like we talked about, more severe, we might want medication as well. And we can see a return to functioning. We can have productive, meaningful, joyful lives, no matter what. And I think keeping that faith, as you talked about, that's there, that it is there, and that your faith, God and Jesus will lead you to that place, right, if we give it an opportunity. Okay, so I think that's part of my message. Don't give up. There's always hope. There's always something else, and particularly for kids. And I know it's scary to think about kids suffering and needing treatment, but oh my gosh, it can be so helpful to do that. I'm actually going to stop here, but what I'm going to suggest is I have a bunch of resources and slides at the end. I'd be happy if you guys want to grab those and put them on your website or send them out in an email to people. That way you guys can see what some of the resources are. We've got a bunch of stuff on our website at CHOC. And skills videos, and we've got handouts for parents translated into Spanish as well, and some in Vietnamese. So you can avail yourself of that, but there's a bunch of other places, not just CHOC. Okay, now I'm going to stop. Thank you.
All right, everybody, so we're going to get set here for our question and answer. So if you have any questions that you want to ask, put them on those cards, and we'll come by and collect them. And so I'll let you do that while we get set up for the question and answer.
Grab it in here. Sit in the middle.
If you guys have those questions, just put them up in the air and we'll grab those. We'll put her to work. Oh, you got yours there? All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. We'll take a look at these while we go. If there's any other ones, feel free to bring them up.
What? I'm good. No, I'm good.
I'm almost sitting the wrong way. I feel, again, I got to go this way. You guys are making me a little lopsided here.
I know. I found myself like.
Oh. All right.
Do you want to just dive in here with some of them?
Yeah, we could dive in. I mean, I'll start with one that I know has come up. What happens? So, in cases where a parent is concerned that if they get a diagnosis for their kid, it's going to cause them to be stigmatized, so they don't want to take their kids in to get any help.
Yeah.
What would you recommend? How would you speak to parents?
Yeah, and I have to say, there's been a lot, it's no news to anyone in this room, there's been a lot of stigmatization of mental health, as you know. But I think as we've had these conversations and these things that we're, as a society, sort of saying, hey, mental health exists, but we can treat it. It's not scary. We're seeing more and more places change some of those limiting things. So I know a lot of times people have said, well, in the military, like that's going to cause a problem if my child wants to go in the military. And more the military does have avenues by which you can get an evaluation to say, no, you're okay, you can go. It used to be like, we had this ridiculous rule in a lot of states, including California, that physicians who said I've had treatment for depression caused a problem with their license, but California took that off of the application. So I think we're seeing more and more strides, but I think that's a concern. I think talking to the person about, hey, here's my concern, and I think a lot of times for kids, there are diagnoses we can give that by definition go away with treatment, so like adjustment disorder, some of those kinds of things. So I really, I think it's worse in the end for a child to have a mental health condition that does not get treated than it is for the possible stigmatization of going and trying to get treatment, because I think we all sort of understand and can have that conversation.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I found too is that when you have that diagnosis in the school system, it's like you have the keys to a whole new kingdom.
Yes.
That if you don't have it, you don't get access to the services that your child needs.
That is true.
And once you have it, it's like, bam, it opens up all kinds of doors that you didn't know were there. So.
Yeah. Then it's better to get all of those accommodations, because then you don't have the diagnosis anymore, right? Potentially, or you learn what accommodations help you be successful.
Yeah, and I found that those accommodations sometimes too, depending on how long they have them, will follow them into college if they need them. So another interesting thing to keep in mind too.
Yeah, so colleges do have services, not quite in the same way that schools do. You have to reach out and access them, but they do all have an office that deals with accommodations. So a child can go and say, like, these are the accommodations I had in high school, I still need them. And then they can work, that office works with the professor so that it's not the child who has to talk to every professor.
Yeah, it works well.
Yeah.
So I think that a lot of people experience this, I know we did, is what if my teen refuses to go to therapy?
Yeah.
You have to encounter that a few times.
No. Yeah, all the time. I think adolescence is a time where autonomy is super important. And I think it can easily become a power struggle. So one of the things that teens also don't love is to be excluded. So sometimes what I often say to parents is, why don't you come, but let the teen know that you're coming. And if they wanted to come, that would be great. We could, decide things knowing your point of view. But if not, that's fine. We're just going to go. And I usually find that gets a kid there fairly fast. because they kind of want to be involved. Not always, but at least even then you can kind of help with, okay, well, here's some strategies. Let's try those. Come back. Let's try it again. And, we keep trying.
What speech would you give, from the parent to the child?
Yeah.
Yes, there's the one of I'm going to go and you can come, but, what might be a good way to approach it?
I think one of the things you could say is, I am worried about you, and these are the reasons why. I think it's always nice to put together, because if you just say I'm worried about you, then the teen can kind of be like, that's stupid, I'm fine. Whereas if you say, I don't see you hanging out with your friends, you're not doing the things that you used to like to do, I've seen your grades drop, it just worries me because I care about you so much. And, depending who's in the household, but, I and your dad or, whomever, we feel like maybe we could learn some things to help you better. It would be great if you wanted to come too, but I totally get it if you don't. But we're going to go because we care so much about you that we want to learn some things that we could do better. I think that way you've kind of set the stage that this is about caring. You're invited if you want to, that's fine, but we can make some changes. And I think, kids, even in the throes of adolescence when, it seems like, who is this living in my house? I could tell you in therapy where they admit these things to me, and you'll find when kids get older too, right? I saw a comedian once who said, I was surprised how much my parents learned between the ages of 15 and 24, right? Because then they'll come back later and be like, okay, you were right. But in the throes, them watching you do something teaches them that, oh, that's okay. It's not shameful. No one's upset about it. It's okay.
I know we've used something similar to that, like in marriage counseling.
Yeah.
Like if one partner does not want to go to therapy, and so people will say, well, go on your own.
Yeah.
Because even going on your own starts to change you,
Yes.
and so you see things differently, so you're going to relate differently. So that applies in the parent-child
Absolutely.
dynamic as
Yeah.
well. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. A question someone had was, when do you know when someone is ready for medication? So not necessarily just kids, but maybe young adults who didn't get the help that they needed as kids.
Yeah. I think generally speaking, we kind of talk about, potentially, a couple things. One is if the symptoms are so severe that you're having thoughts of harming yourself or things like that, you probably want to think about medication right away, because that's, we just don't want anything bad to happen, and it can take a little time for medication to work. If it's in that space where it's like, I'm not sure which is the right thing to start with, we often talk about giving, 6 to 8 sessions of talk therapy. And if it doesn't seem like I'm just not able to enact the things we're talking about, that you might think about adding an antidepressant at that time. I think if your insomnia is severe because of your depression, that might be another time to think about medication or any of those physical symptoms, so that I can't eat, I can't sleep, I can't concentrate. Medication really helps with those physical symptoms as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I was thinking also on medication, one of the questions is a little bit different, but it's how can I get my 66-year-old sister to take medication? She refuses all medical attention. So parents for kids under 18 have a little more, they have a little more authority, obviously, than you do a child even over 18. So let's just reframe it so it's a child now over 18, but still in that very vulnerable age period. And you can't insist that they take medication. But again, what are some strategies, conversations?
Yeah. It's so hard because, a symptom of a lot of types of mental health disorders is actually, and I can never say the long Greek word for it, but it basically is you don't recognize you have a problem, right? You're just like, I'm fine. Like, what are you talking about? I don't need medication. The other thing to know about medication, too, is it just, for a lot of people, it doesn't feel right. I don't feel like myself. I don't want to do it because of those side effects, which is totally understandable. We all sort of feel that way. So I think it's a two-pronged approach, and this is going to sound a little weird, but in some ways, you have to get in the headspace yourself of I can't make you, because the more that you press on someone, like, I'm going to make you do it, and you're bad if you don't do it, people read that energy off of you. Even if you're not saying it, they read it off of you, right? So getting in the headspace of, like, I can't make this happen, but I care about you. And to have that sort of discussion of, I care about you, and I see some things happening that worry me. And again, let's go to the behaviors. I see, gosh, that you lost your job, and I see that people don't want you to come to family gatherings, and that worries me. I don't know, do you want to talk about that a little bit? And again, the first time is probably going to be no. But to keep coming back of just with, I care about you, truly in the headspace of, I can't make this happen, so I have to be okay. And it's like faith, right? I have to put things in God's hand. I have to be okay with it not happening or going down the way I want it to. And ironically, you're more likely to have things happen then, or when you're quiet and let God do his work, right? You can see it in a way that when I'm like, it has to be this answer, that you don't allow things to happen.
Yeah, I would I don't know who asked the question, but maybe if you haven't been to the Hope for Mental Health community before, we talk a lot about Dr. Javier Amador's book and the LEAP. I'm not sick, I don't need help. And if you haven't gotten that or read or seen any of his videos, they're fantastic. He has another book basically it's becoming an expert in the LEAP method. So it's an approach to somebody who, as Heather says, just genuinely does not understand their own illness and how sick they are, or how much their mental illness is affecting them. Yeah. And so it's a strategy for those kind of conversations with people who might lack that awareness.
Yeah.
I think it's probably more effective with adults, but it has elements that are going to transfer over to a child who is, or adolescent who's resistant or doesn't even understand their own illness.
And I'll say one of the things for these kinds of reasons too, in our intensive outpatient program, one of the things they do is we have parents come in twice a week and teach them the skills, the dialectical and behavioral therapy skills. And then the second, so that's the first session in each week. The second session with the parents are what we call multifamily groups. So you practice the skills, but you practice on another team before you practice on your own. And then because you don't have that sort of level of history, and then that team can kind of coach you a little bit about, here's how it sounded to me. So that's another thing of just, hey, let me practice with another family member, and kind of you can coach me through it. And like, did I sound okay before I go into the high pressure situation?
That sounds good.
I had a couple questions related to bullying.
Yeah.
So like, how do I deal with a child who says he feels bad about himself because he's constantly teased or bullied at school? He's withdrawn, doesn't like school as much, says sometimes he doesn't want to be here anymore.
Yeah. I think we're getting an increased recognition of the fact that bullying is an incredibly toxic thing. And it's toxic actually for the bully as well, because generally speaking, bullies probably aren't the happiest of people themselves, and probably often have had a history of trauma in some way. And hopefully we're starting to recognize that. So one thing is, I really do encourage working with the school. I know often kids will be like, no, I don't want to be a snitch. I don't want anyone to know. But it's such a toxic behavior. I think we can't necessarily take the don't tell anyone response from our kids as being the response, because schools have a responsibility to address this. And I think one of the things I would say to schools who maybe are a little more reluctant is just, it's not good for the bully either. Like, you've got two kids suffering here. You've got my kids suffering, but the person doing the bullying is suffering too. So we got to address this, and we got to do something about it. And the schools do have a mandate to do it. But I know it's a hard thing. But I think recognizing that sort of toxic approach, the other that it can cause, the other part of that is, helping the child to sort of continue to develop. And again, this is that delicate balance, right? You don't ever want to say to a kid who's been bullied, like, oh, you just need to understand that bully, or oh, you just need to, shake it off, like it's okay. Because it isn't. It's like an earworm, right? It gets into our head. So having some conversations also about, how do I shore up your resilience as a kid of like, tell me what is good about you. Like, did you feel like that was true? Why did you feel like that was true? How can we talk about that? How do I, teach you, a response? I remember back when I was in school, I had a kid come up to me and, picked at me about my clothes and some other things. And, I went home and told my mom, and my mom practiced with me how to say, don't you know anything? As a sort of response, because a lot of times bullies are like, I don't, and it worked. I mean, that was a great response. So, you can also sort of, if it's mild enough, you can sort of do some of that. Let me shore up your resilience, and there's lots of books out there as well. And I think for kids, reading kids' books together, kids are sort of, their brains are wired to learn through play. They're wired to learn through stories. So there's a lot of resources out there to help with that as well. Yeah.
So maybe slightly connected with that, a question about teen depression, suicide, and social media, and what you're seeing. And then the specific question is, can you cite any studies that show like a direct or positive correlation between?
I love that. It's a nice scientific question. So all the studies that are out there that I have seen, so I always want to hold the possibility that I've missed something in the literature, and if anyone knows of one, send it to me. All the studies I've seen have been correlational, not causational, right? So it's not that we have, it's kind of hard these days to sort of randomly say, you're going to be on social media, you're not for 5 years during your teen years, so I can tell what happened. So it's hard. Almost everything has to be correlational. But correlations are weird things, right? Like there's weird stuff that's correlated sometimes where you're like, blue eyes are correlated with, chewing gum. It's like, I don't think one is causing the other, right?
That would be me.
Okay, that's you. So,
Just
but your blue eyes don't cause you to chew gum, and chewing gum does not cause your blue eyes.
I just wanted to let you know that.
No, it's good. It's good. Chewing gum is great.
Chewing gum right now.
Maybe subconsciously I channeled that. So the studies out there are correlational, and they can seem very compelling, and it's certainly important to look at that. But I think it's a more complex relationship than just this causes that. I think we know from some internal documents now with Facebook and Instagram that it can affect kids' sort of view of themselves and others. I love that there's some people on Instagram now who are doing like, here's how you pose, and this is what I look like when I'm not posing for an Instagram picture, which are great because you're like, oh, you look really good. Oh, you really look like, okay, I look like that. And, those sort of tricks that people use. And I think social media is a tool, like any other tool. A hammer can be dangerous. Like, you can, smash your finger, but if you use it right, like you can build beautiful things, right? And I think social media is kind of the same in that when I think about kids, maybe, LGBTQ youth who like live in rural areas and don't know another youth, or a kid with anxiety or depression who lives somewhere isolated or isn't able to tell anyone, that ability to find community and know I'm not alone can be life-saving, right? And used incorrectly, it can be, terrible. And so I think I would love to see us as parents, as schools, teach kids. We did that at one point, teaching kids about advertisements. Like, all those sugary cereal advertisements, why do you think they're making it look so cool? Because they want to sell you something. And so the more you talk to kids about that, they're kind of like, oh, I'm not going to listen to that. I think we need to do the same about social media, of like, what's good about it and what's bad about it, and how do you harness it to be a tool that works for you and not a tool that works against you. So, yeah. I will tell you, I am on a social media diet right at the moment because with the election and everything, I'm so anxious every time I open any of those. And I'm like, I'm off for a little while. And sometimes that's a good thing, right? Of just saying, okay, and then just check out, like, how does that affect you? Is that better? Yeah. Yeah. I see a thumbs up. All right, good.
And another question is if a child is in a mental health emergency,
Yeah.
right, where you need to get help right
Yeah.
away, how do you handle that situation? How do you calm the situation?
Yeah,
What
yeah.
do you do?
Yeah, so, I want to say I will always say to parents, if I'm worried about my kid, because all of us as healthcare providers, we got to listen to parents because you guys know your kids, and you know when something isn't right. So I'm going to say to you, never hesitate. If you feel like it's an emergency, it's an emergency. And better to be a little embarrassed if someone says to you later, like, it was fine, than it is to miss something. So that is my underlying piece, right? We do have a system in Orange County. There is a mobile crisis system, which going on, and that's part of the resources, but it's OC Links. So the number is 855-OC-LINKS. And they can either help talk to you a little bit about, is this a crisis? And they can send a mobile unit out to your house. They don't send the police anymore, because I know a lot of times people have concerns about calling a mobile crisis unit for a psychiatric emergency. But now it is a team that has behavioral health training through the county. So that's one thing. Calling 911. If you call 911, just say it is a life-threatening emergency, or so that they know, like, you need to come. If I can't transport otherwise, I do think if it's sort of I'm not sure. I think taking a moment to say, can we just draw a breath, settle for a moment? What's something that's comforting to that individual? Be it food or drink, be it a blanket, be it anything. Like, is there any way I can settle this for a moment so that we can chat? So part of the thing, because we're social creatures, we mirror each other, right? And so when I start talking a little slower, now this is very hard to do, right? In the middle of emergency, you want to go, okay, stop it, I gotta call, and it just ratchets everyone up, right? And so you have to really learn to be like, I'm just deliberately going to slow down. And because we're social creatures, it is very hard to be with someone with an emotional sort of, I'm slowing down, and not slow down yourself, right? It's my secret sauce when I'm dealing with angry customers, is just, I'm just going to slow down so that we all can discuss this, because I really do want to hear what the problem is, but I don't want you to yell at me. So how do I just slow the temperature? And so sometimes you can slow the temperature enough that you can figure out, is this life-threatening? Is it not? But I'm going to say, if I can't do that, or I try it and it's just not helping, don't hesitate, right? The system is there to help.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you certainly can, if you can transport the child safely, you can come to an emergency department. We do have people in our emergency department who will do an evaluation. However, I think there are times people think that the emergency department is because our mental health system, as you guys know, I'm sure anyone trying to navigate it knows, it is still profoundly broken in so many ways. So a lot of times it is like, well, I'll just go to the emergency department. And we get a lot of people who come in and they're like, so you're just going to admit them to our inpatient psychiatric center and then they will be fixed. And it's like, yeah. And I think, anyone who's had any experience knows, like, no, it's a long journey. It's not that simple. But the emergency room is for those life-threatening emergencies, those times where it's like, are you a danger to yourself? Are you a danger to someone else? We have other kinds of resources that we can use for kids. We do have our mental health crisis clinic. So it's one of the things we've tried to do, because I know one of the things that happens is, like, I've tried, and I've had this from parents, I've tried for a year, I can't get therapy anywhere. The wait lists are forever. What do I do as I see this escalation happening? So we do have, we call our mental health crisis clinic. It is a clinic where, and this is for kids who are having suicidal ideation, so they've escalated to that point, don't have another therapist. They can get in with us within a couple of days, and we'll do up to 4 sessions to stabilize and connect into the community. So it's a way to kind of keep kids from having to go to the ED. And I'm just going to say, while the ED is life-saving, and I will say go if you need to. I will also say, if you're going because I just can't access things otherwise, it's going to be a 6 to 8 hour wait. It's in a loud, noisy place that is the worst place to be if you are having any sort of, mental health kind of concerns. Much better to find a clinic, go to the doctor's office, do something if we're not in that immediate crisis where it is more comfortable and we can have this kind of conversation. Yeah. But it is life-saving if I feel like it's an emergency. Was that what you were? That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks so much for answering all those questions and being
Appreciate
with us here today.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming today. A few things that we have. If you look on here, we have our mental health support groups. If you know how to use a QR code, I saw all the phones going up taking pictures of other things, so you can scan that, and that'll give you information on the various support groups that we have. You can see some of them there on board. Also, you can go to saddleback.com, care and support groups, if you want to go right to the website. Next slide. Up there, there's ways that you can get involved. On your table is a contact sheet. If you'd like to be on our mailing list just for email for different events and things coming up, that would be great to have you sign up on that. One of the things we're doing, this is the last mental health for this year, okay? Because we're already in end of October. So we'll be launching this a little different in the new year, okay? We're going to look at a few different things. So to be updated on that, you want to put your email address on there so we can give you more information on that as we get closer, because that's the easiest way to figure out things, right? You've tried to, some of you just wandered in here because you heard like an announcement and food, and now you're here. And so we'd like to be able to send you more information about how to sign up, how to come in, and all that kind of stuff. And so you want to be on our mailing list for that. On the next page, we have the next Breathe Conversations call coming up. It's a conversation about suffering and the formation of hope with Dr. Kurt Thompson. I don't know if you've ever heard Dr. Kurt, but he is amazing, and so you don't want to miss this. That's on November 16th. It's at 10 a.m. to 11 p.m., and you can see the registration down there at kwarren.com. /breathe calls. And so, again, highly recommend. You don't want to miss that. He is amazing if you haven't heard him before. So you want to sign up for that. And the next slide, let's see, that's it. Thank you for joining us today. So thanks so much for coming. I do have one more thing. We got our little giveaway. I got 2 little bags up here. So if you have a little white note on the bottom of your seat that says, has mental health on it, and hang on, I got to find my little piece of paper. It's in here somewhere. But it's actual words. It's not gum on the bottom of your chair. It looks like this. You won. All right? It's got to say you won on it, not gum or anything else. Not a little sticker. It's going to say this on it. It's going to say this on it. There's one over there. It'll look just like this. This is an actual replica. This is it right here. All right, we got one. So there's one more out there, I believe. Thank you. There you go. You're welcome. One more. Hey, there it is. All right, you guys can stop. If you got anything on the bottom of the chair, feel free to clean it for us. That's fine. All right, well, thank you guys for coming. Have a great one. We'll talk to you later.